Connect is the epigraph to Howard's End, Ian Forster's 1910 novel, written in a time that bridged the enormous cultural gap between the authors of the Victorian era and the modernist writers of the 20th century. I studied it as part of A-level English at school, and even though I hated school and exams, I always thought of Howard's End with great affection. The novel concerns a house, Howard's End, and the relationships that develop between the Schlegel and the Wilcox families. While the former is devoted to art and imagination, the latter are dedicated to business and imperialism. Forster was also trying to impart his anguish of the impact that the increasingly technological age was having upon people and their environments. Long before the movie of the book was made, I envisioned the house, Howard's End, as being like the stone, slightly scary old house and garden of one of my great aunts. Much later, when the film of the book came out in 1992, the house was much grander, but the location on an unpaved road in a rural area on the outskirts of a sprawling city was exactly the same. On the first page of the book, Ruth Wilcox, the family matriarch, is described in a letter from Helen Schlegel to her sister Meg, having been seen from her window, as walking alone through the garden and the meadow early in the morning, her long dress trailing wetly through the dew-soaked grass, lost in thought and communion with nature. To this day, when I cross my small lawn to fill the bird feeder early in the morning, I think of that description and imagine the shushing sound Mrs. Wilcox's silk gown made as she walked. I'm also transported back to my aunt's beautiful garden, as well as to my own time studying and living in the pages of the book as a teenager. 3 moments in time strung together by the slenderest of threads. Something about this entrancing and romantic description really resonated with me as a teenager. I badly wanted this to be me, out in the morning after the night before, in a long trailing ball gown and wellies, collecting still warm chicken eggs for breakfast with the rising sun. Sadly, this has never happened. Well, I have collected eggs, though not in a ball gown. But beyond the novel itself, the 2 simple words, "only connect" from the frontispiece, have resonated as a constant in my life. I'm not sure why, but they often popped into my head. I murmur them to myself occasionally, and they have been comforting. The extract, "only connect," is taken from the following statement when Margaret Schlegel is musing how to help her future husband, Henry Wilcox, reconcile his life. Only connect. That was the whole of her sermon. Only connect the prose and the passion, and both will be exalted, and human love will be seen at its height. Live in fragments no longer. Connection is a word used a lot now. Brené Brown talks marvelously about courage, compassion, connection in her book, The Gifts of Imperfection. I'm sure many of you may have heard her TED Talk. She's talking about the scientific research of shame, but her openness and vulnerability are so moving as well as funny. We can easily connect to her because we share the same human emotions. For me, it's always been about stories. Our stories connect us to others and place markers in time through the description of events and the images we create in our minds. The best of these can convey such awe and wonder that they live in us for our entire lives. My mum and dad died. My mum and dad died less than 3 months apart from each other at the end of 2019. My dad, who had always been very healthy, died very suddenly on October the 12th And then my mum, who had had Alzheimer's, died from a fall just after Christmas. It was a very difficult time. Sorry. Between clearing out the house and traveling back and forwards to Canada and worrying about my mum, I finally got back home, after driving totally exhausted on New Year's Eve. My sister, brother, and I had finished clearing out their house just after Thanksgiving, and I was finally bringing the last of their furniture that they'd originally brought from England when they'd moved. I'd always loved this mid-century furniture, but it was all in a sorry state. On New Year's Day, very early in the morning, I was checking my email as I had coffee, and there was a daily blast from the Center for Action and Contemplation. This was a special New Year's message titled, "Moving Forward by Looking Back." It was a lovely piece inspired by Shane Claiborne about building the new from the old, about God restoring all things. I casually thought, that's a nice message, and began to get on with my day. I wanted to make a start on figuring out what to do with the furniture that was piled everywhere. I decided to check the Urkel website for some cleaning recommendation, and after a little noodling about, I found that they had some facsimile catalogues from the time my mum and dad bought their furniture in the late 60s. They were very retro cool. The catalogue cover even had a picture of their sideboard, complete with a cartoon spokes lion, the Urkel lion. After a few pages in the PDF, flipping through, the heading on the page jumped out of me. The Urkel lion looks back to go forwards. I sat and looked, and for maybe a minute, I was completely stunned. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand on end, and I just sat. And tears began to roll down my face. After my parents died, I felt nothing but numbness and despair at the hole that was left, and a deafening silence and no comfort. But I found that repairing and restoring that furniture formed a basis to heal that lost space in my life. Carl Jung came up with the term synchronicity to describe the principle that he believes served as a connection between seemingly meaningful coincidences that cannot possibly be causally linked. Excuse me. For example, you think of a friend you haven't seen for years, and suddenly, out of the blue, they contact you. Does anyone have a tissue? Yeah. Drama. Thank you. Thank you so much. The clue here is the word meaningful. We most often encounter experiences like this during times of intense emotion or major life transitions or stress. While these things have seemingly no causal connection, they often offer a sense of deep meaning to those who experience them. For a while now, I've been struggling with some major changes I want to make in my life. As part of this, I've been exploring several new things and ideas, one of which is being part of a study group this summer discussing the Gospel of John. Actors are reading the passages in a slow, more dramatic way, creating a contemplative mood. When all things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made, was spoken. I felt an instant feeling of recognition flooding me, not for the words which I've heard many times in my life, but in the meaning. Of course, we have always all been connected. I knew it to be true in a way I'd never felt before, and it was a remembering. I realized the words "only connect" had been a signpost in my life, back to knowing and oneness. As John said in his first letter, "I do not write to you because you do not know the truth. I am writing to you here because you know it already." And as Julian of Norwich observed, "The love of God creates in us such a oneing that when it is truly seen, no person can separate themselves from another." So now when I think of connection, I feel this knowing and oneness. I believe as humans, our time on earth is to be used reconnecting, connecting past and present, to connect to all other humans, no matter how different we may find them, with compassion through our common experiences, to connect our way of living and using resources with the impact it has on everything surrounding us in the natural world, and finally, our connection to the divine whole. Thank you.